game like I played.
Patrick, this is going to be a historic episode of the Top Level Podcast.
Oh, I see what you're doing there. It's the format, right?
It is. It's this. I mean, I guess we kind of talked about historic last week, but we're really talking about historic this week.
Yeah, I mean, aren't you glad I slid a little bit in there at the end there to hit you with? But, dude, I've just been so entranced by the fact whenever there's a brand new format, it's like that's like I mean, it's already when Standard rotates and it's kind of like vaguely a new format. That's already Christmas, right? But when there's like a whole new format, oh my God. And in this case, it's one in which a bunch of people are playing and it hasn't been like
ruined
processed
yet?
or so. Well, not only that, it's also it's a completely alien format compared to last week. Like you can just like they just added hundreds and hundreds of cards because of Jumpstart. So, and it completely revolutionizes the format, to say nothing of just making a bunch of changes to the banned and suspended list.
So, I don't know, do they call it like the Mandela effect or what? Where like, I just never noticed historic before, but then you brought up some stuff around historic when we were talking last week, and then all of a sudden, everywhere I looked, like, I noticed that people were talking about historic, my friends were talking about historic. People who I'm on other mailing lists with, the New York area players are like passionate about historic. And I was just like, I don't even know what this is. But then I looked around and I'm like, wow, there's historic everywhere. And like really good players are like streaming historic. And more than anything else, I was just so excited looking at some of these historic decks. I'm like, this seems like something I could get behind. Like there's cool decks to play and they're not too broken, but they do cool things. And you can play fair things. You can play unfair things. And it's a wide open canvas right now.
Okay, so first of all, part of the reason why it's suddenly everywhere is because historic is linked to Arena. It's intimately interwoven with Arena, right? Like historic is effectively all of the cards on Arena. That's the format. You can play with the cards on Arena, right? And it's not just as simple as all the sets. They've been adding new cards and, mixing up a whole bunch of what kind of stuff appears on Arena, but that's effectively what historic is supposed to be. And Arena's importance has catapulted to the top because of how much, there's no Magic tournaments this year, and between you and me, next year's not looking so good either. So,
man. I was talking to, I actually said this on Twitter today, but I talked about this with my wife recently. I don't think I've had a 4-month period before where I just didn't pick up a Magic card or didn't play in a sanctioned Magic tournament since I got my DCI number, which was 24 years ago. Right? I just have never not played in a Magic tournament for a quarter.
Dude, you got to play online. That's the future.
I mean, I play online, if not every day, like every week. But
no, I'm saying a tournament. No, I'm saying play one tournament once every 4 months to get your fix.
Ah, well, maybe.
So that's a big thing, right? Because Arena's been so catapulted to the top of not only competitive play currently, but for the foreseeable future. But also because Wizards has been doing some work for a while. They've been setting up this historic format for a couple of years now. And under the hood, I think what's going on from a design level is that this is the first format for Magic that's kind of engineered kind of from this other side, where instead of you start with all the cards that are in sets and then maybe you ban some, instead they're literally picking cards to add to the format. They've already added like 20 cards at a time on 3 different occasions to Arena that are just not like they're reprints, but they're from stuff that's just not an Arena set. And then they're making a new set coming out next month that's a blend of the 2 Amonkhet sets, but it's just half of the cards from each of them, but to make a better set,
That's cool.
And then this Jumpstart product is engineered having a whole bunch of stuff where, first of all, there's a lot of reprints. Second of all, there's a bunch of cards that are just brand new that are going to be legal and historic, and a bunch of them are game changers. But anyway, and then also they still wanted the Jumpstart product to be as good as it could for paper, but there are 20 cards, something like that, 20 cards or so that were good for the paper experience for people that are just trying to like pick up one of these decks and have some fun. But for the competitive, like, you know, it would be a long-term problem if you put Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning online. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, then you're just doing something kind of different.
Well,
you know?
Some people would call it a problem. Other people would say that's just the cards you should add, because it sounds to me like they're trying to engineer a great format instead of having a format emerge from sets. You know, to me, that would engineer the greatest format. Like, yeah, like all the Lightning Bolts, all the Chain Lightnings, but like none of the Force of Wills and turn 2 combo kill pieces? Sounds good to me.
And to be clear, they're trying to strike the balance, because it's not like they're trying to set up a format where it's not like if you look at the decks that people are playing that it's all just the pre-canned decks that WotC made or whatever. It's not like that. There's a few cards that are so powerful and warping that they demand a deck to be made. But it's not like this balance of what's going on here is the format that they've shaped. Instead, what they're trying to do is shape the pieces that they add to try to have good principles, or at least the principles they want to adhere to, and to try to make this a novel kind of format in which it's particularly about decks. Like, you have decks that have an identity. You know, like in Modern, so like in Legacy, the stuff is so busted. It's awesome that the decks have so much personality, but things are so busted that there's a real, sometimes some of the constraints of the format really put a cap on how much you can try certain types of things, right?
I think I know what you mean. It's like sometimes you'll ask me a question like, well, what about if you just play 2 Tarmogoyfs in such and such a deck, or 2, Young Pyromancers, and there's a deck, here's 58 cards, and add 2 Young Pyromancers. Or in Vintage, sometimes there's like 1 Monastery Mentor, or there's like 1 Tinker Colossus combo kill. And it's kind of weird. You're just like, what is the identity of this deck? This seems like a deck, and here are some cards that go in other decks. And is this a combo deck? Is this a control deck? Is that kind of what you're getting at? Because I really feel that way sometimes.
Yeah. So each of the formats has a little bit of a different way that decks exist in the metagame. In Vintage, almost every deck has the majority of its cards that are the same types of cards that are on a short list of cards that everybody plays. And then your identity comes from having a couple genres that you're a part of. And among your genre, you have a couple packages that you might choose between, right? And that's how you build your deck. And it's like wildly customizing to have, if you add a Tinker and a Colossus, those 2 cards, it radically changes your deck because your deck's got 20 tutors in it, right? So in Legacy, the thing is that there's a huge amount of cards that get played. It's just ridiculous how many cards get played. But there's a ton of versions of the same sort of thing, right? Like, at the end of the day, all these different decks that just play tons of rituals and then kill you, they're not actually that different from each other, right? And as far as the interaction goes, maybe there's 23 discard spells that people play, but you kind of have to play either discard or permission or mana lock somebody in some way. You know?
It's funny that you say that. Drew Levin once told me about like the different kind of play all the rituals decks in Legacy that, you could stop them, but then you have to kill them in the next 7 turns. And I'm like, well, why? And he's just like, because all their cards are the same. Like, if they just draw any 7 cards, they're going to combo kill you again. I was just like, oh, I never thought about it that way. It doesn't really matter what cards they have. They're literally all the same. Yeah, they have different names, but they all pretty much just make 1 or 2 mana, and then you do something.
Exactly. In Modern, there's decks with personality. There's a whole bunch of them, of course. But Modern's in kind of this weird place where the decks have so much about whatever it is they do, and they attack on so many different angles and axes that like the only way to keep them all in check is with these incredibly powerful hate cards. And you can't possibly play all the hate cards for all the decks. And so a lot of what's going on in Modern is there's just like, there's a ton of metagaming. Modern is a great format for a person who wants to play a bunch of, they have a deck they like and they want to tune it against whatever other people are playing right now. Pioneer has a chance to be a format with decks that have personality, but they're a little less extreme with regards to how busted of things they do. and the range of types of interaction that are necessary in order to be able to even interact with them in a meaningful way, it's a lot more varied. It's not as on Rails where you either have to, in Legacy, have one of a couple paths, or in Modern, every deck demands its own answer, but the answers are like ridiculously powerful and narrow. I think Pioneer has Historic has a chance to be a little bit different, So I guess Pioneer, part of it is that Pioneer is kind of this other thing that emerged accidentally and chaotically. So I don't think Pioneer actually even has its own identity yet, because it's such it really is just a chaotic animal that that got, loved by people much faster than it was expected. And so it's kind of just inventing itself as time goes on. And so I think it's going to ebb and flow, and it's a lot more chaotic and Wild Westy, But I think the Historic has this Wild West aspect with regards to themes, but that's only because of the power level of the themes and how you metagame against them being so not understood.
I think we should hit one of the decks, and I think that'll kind of solidify what you were talking about. Can we start with the Naya? I think they're calling it like Tinker tokens, sort of.
Well, it's basically a new type of deck that's made possible because of Craterhoof Behemoth appearing in Jumpstart.
So I think this is just a wildly appropriate kind of combination of what you were talking about. Like, here's a deck with some character. Obviously, we've seen Craterhoof Behemoth small creature decks in the past, but this kind of like puts together a bunch of stuff in my opinion, a new way. It has at least two different distinct game plans. One of them's pretty good. One of them's awesome, and it's already evolving. It's kind of like already learning from itself.
Well, there's actually several different subgenres of this that people are kind of variations that people are trying to work out, but.
Sure.
Yeah, you go.
I'm just looking at the one that was played recently by Metallics87. And I think it's a pretty good representation of the archetype, with the one exception I would say is Metallics87 has 4 Fire Prophecies in the sideboard. My first exposure to this deck, actually, Pro Tour historian Brian David Marshall actually texted me the other day, and he's just like, you would probably grind your way to Mythic in 2 days if you just played this. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's a heck of a text. And he sends this to me, and I didn't understand how the Fire Prophecies worked. And so Fire Prophecy is a card that's 1 and a red for an instant, does 3 to target creature. A lot of us have played this card in Limited, and some of us have played it in Constructed even, but as this additional ability that you put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library, and you can draw a card. This card is sweet for 2 reasons, one of which is that if you draw your Craterhoof Behemoth, you can get rid of it. Right?
Definitely.
So this is a Naya deck with no ability to cast G, let alone GGG. And separately, one of the biggest threats to this archetype in the entire format, which I'm sure we'll spend some time on, happens to be a 3/3 creature. So it's kind of a really, really amazing overlap of doing 3 damage to a creature and helping you fix your hand. So basically this deck is like, 20 plus methods of creating a token creature, everything from Legion's Landing or Satyr's Cunning on turn 1 to really powerful token creators like History of Benalia, then a bunch of the 2-mana ones, and then you combine that with either Transmogrify or Look a Coppercoat Outcast. The only creature in the deck is Craterhoof Behemoth, so despite the fact that you're attacking a lot with token creatures, your Transmogrifier or your Look a Coppercoat Outcast always makes this giant green creature that gives all your guys +X/+X, and you, boom, hopefully get them in 1 turn.
A really important, advantage to the list that you're speaking of, Metallic 87's version, Metallics 87, not only do they have, I think they actually are playing 30 token makers, 29 I think they have a full 30 token makers, counting Elspeth Sun's Nemesis, Castle Ardenvale, all that. So they're playing like full-on...
Like half their deck makes tokens.
Right, and if they ever draw Luca, they just win, right? But something that's actually subtly really important is the Kahira, the Orphan Guard aspect of this. Kahira, the Orphan Guard, can be a token of sorts. You can pay 3 and then you pay 3 again, and now you have a 3/2 Vigilance that you didn't have to use a card for, so it's got kind of a card advantage part of the token thing going on there too. But it also because it's a creature that you can hit with your Transmogrify or your Luca, because that's your other one. Is Transmogrify is your other source of converting your token into a behemoth. And the behemoth, by the way, is important because you're playing a token deck. So when you flip the behemoth, you're going to hit for 100. You know.
Yeah, you could have a ton of guys in play.
But the Kahira has the ability to actually buff some of your cards. You know, like it buffs dinosaurs, which is notable for Forbidden Friendship. You know, that's kind of cute, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know how many other token makers that are going to come along that are going to end up being the right types, because this list currently doesn't actually feature all that many. But I think that depending on what token makers we see or what other token makers might be in the format, the Kahira's ability to actually buff the tokens, like giving you an anthem out of your sideboard, could be like really appealing if the token makers are actually good enough.
That's true. The other thing is, you know, God forbid that you're not winning in one turn. I think that it's not nothing that if you gave your Craterhoof Behemoth a little bit of oomph, including some vigilance, so he could play offense, defense for you. Like that probably
That's
comes up
not
sometimes.
how it's going, dude.
No,
the Behemoth is going to hit for 100. So this Naya deck isn't really a Naya deck. This is really a Boros deck. Yeah, it's just a Boros deck. You can't actually cast the Behemoth, and some of the other Boros token decks that, like Steven Sherwin.
Actually, before we move on, I just wanted to note two things about this list.
Oh yeah, please.
One, I don't know if you would count this as Plan A or Plan B. I think it's more Plan A-ish, even though really want to get to the Craterhoof Behemoth endgame. Like turn 1 Legion's Landing. Turn 2, Dragon Fodder, or, Forbidden Friendship, or Raise the Alarm, whatever you got. Turn 3, History Benalia. Turn 4, Elspeth's Son's Nemesis. Like, that's not bad. Like, that's, like, pretty much resembling a deck. Like, somebody might have to deal with all that stuff. Especially if you think about the buff potential on Elspeth's Son's Nemesis, and if people are trading cards for fractional cards early on in the game. And second of all, there is an additional card in the sideboard outside of Kahira the Orphan Guard that I thought is worth mentioning, and that's Outlaw's Merriment. Like, this card I keep reading, this card seems pretty good to me. Okay.
It's a little slow.
Yeah, but this is the grindy card. This is like what if I had to actually, get somebody with an Oko / Vraska / that's their way of doing it.
The reason I don't really like I love the idea, but the issue I have with it is that it's an enchantment. These decks already have History of Benalia, Legion's Landing, and some of them play Glorious Anthem. People are already going to have incentive to use disenchants against you. So like boarding in an enchantment that doesn't have an immediate effect, that could just be beaten on the cheap by the cards that your opponent's going to want to, like, I don't know. I'm a little sketchy. It depends on how much people actually end up playing enchantment removal, but I would be careful there.
Yeah, and I guess it's also a little random, right?
Well, yeah, but that person's not going to be too bad. It's random among good options. That's not the problem with the card.
All right. I just thought it was worth noting. Okay.
Yeah. It's good for grinding. But I wanted to talk about another Boros tokens deck. It's very similar. It's the same kind of deck, Transmogrify, Luca, all that. But the twists here, this is a top 4 list from Hooglandia Open. Shout out to Jeff Hoogland, putting on these events. But the Steven Sherwin's Boros tokens list has 3 copies of Glorious Anthem and 4 Heroic Reinforcements. I was curious your thoughts on Heroic Reinforcements in lieu of Elspeth.
Oh, so Heroic Reinforcements was a card. It saw, a little play, I think, in Standard. A couple years back.
It was a pretty good amount of play for one season.
Yeah, so it's like 2 RW, and it makes 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens, and it's on to turn creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain haste. So these guys themselves, swing hastily when you cast Heroic Reinforcements, potentially on turn 4. I like this card because of its Anthemish ability, right? If you had pre-existing tokens, which you could easily have, like, I don't know, 5 tokens or something if you tapped all your mana every turn, then you're adding 2 more, your low end of your damage is like 14 or something on this turn without having yet hit Craterhoof Behemoth. So if you did any damage coming in earlier, it's really good. It's kind of like a mini overrun that also supplies the creatures for the overrun. I think that this card is pretty cool, and the list that BDM sent me actually had heroic reinforcements. So I think it's good. I do think I would want to play all the Lukkas though, right? So this list only has 2 Lukkas. What do you think about that, Patrick?
I don't know. Obviously, my first thought is to play 4, but I do think Transmogrify is better here. And I think that it depends on how fast the format is, because, I mean, I could imagine it being possible that you just don't have enough time to play that many 5s. I would start with 4 and see what happens, personally. But
yeah, I mean, Lukka is just kind of a inferior Transmogrify in this archetype, right? I know it probably doesn't come up that often, but it costs double red, right? So there are 10 planes in this deck, so you might hit 5 and not actually be able to hit a double red. That's possible. It costs 5, right, instead of costing 4. And the other 2 abilities don't really come up very much. So,
not in this style. Not if you're actually playing the token version.
Yeah, so I think this is one of the 2 major archetypes that I really wanted to think about and talk about with Historic. I think it's a really exciting deck, and it's going to be the first one I think that I'm going to try out when I stretch my Historic wings soon.
So there's another style of Lukka Craterhoof Behemoth that goes a very, very different way with it. So it's really weird that they just unsuspended Field of the Dead. And I don't know. I don't think that I think the format long term is going to not want to have Field of the Dead in it. But whatever.
Why would you think that? It's a perfectly reasonable card, Patrick. You need to have like 100 land in play, and they have to all be all different. It's fine. I
think it might have been Andrew Cuneo who noted that, like, does anybody really believe that that Field of the Dead and Wilderness Reclamation are actually like positive additions to the format and not needing to be banned eventually? Can we just get that out of the way now, rip the Band-Aid off, And I kind of agree. I think that long term you're really going to – this format, I don't think it's going to make sense to have Field of the Dead and Wilderness Reclamation. And this deck is actually a great example. It is a deck with Field of the Dead. And if you were to ban Field of the Dead, it would become a Wilderness Reclamation deck. But so the way this deck works is that it gets its tokens not from actual token making stuff per se, but from well, I guess it's weird. It's got Lukka, but it's also got Arboreal Grazer, and then it's got Shark Typhoon, and you can like Lukka your Shark Typhoon. But the main thing is that you Lukka your Field of the Dead tokens. The thing I don't really understand though is why in the world would you want to like hit Arboreal Grazers?
You might accidentally grazer it up.
Yeah, like it can't, like having the option to be able to transform the Grazer into a Craterhoof. Is that really worth the fact that there's like an 80% chance that you're going to transform your shark or your zombie into a Grazer? I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds like a big design. I don't want to say flaw. I've never played that.
I think you kind of got to pick a lane. Like either do the tokens and transform them into the behemoth, or play all your units that cost the same, so that no matter which one you hit the behemoth.
What spectacular stuff is in this deck at 3? Maybe there's something important at 3 that they want to hit.
Well, no, they don't play any cards that cost 3.
Then I don't know, man. I think I would do some kind of rampant growth then, if that was.
Well,
the answer.
they already do. So this deck is part of what's making this deck possible is 4 Explorer and 4 Growth Spiral.
No, I mean I would just do more things that cost 2. If that,
Oh, sure, yeah.
things that cost 2 like that drives up to 4, right? If there's not things that matter that cost 3, then you don't need Arboreal Grazer, right? You could play more, come into play tap lands and play things that cost 2 instead, and you hit your flashpoint at 4.
Dude, it's so nuts that they just there just isn't enough Growth Spiral going on, so they just made Explore. It's so crazy. Newly added to the format because of Jumpstart.
I mean, Explorer has a long history of helping powerful mages accomplish their goals.
So I think that, there's already been a whole bunch of Field of the Dead decks that have done really well. Some are using Golos, some are Bant Ramp or Sultai Ramp or this Temur Luca, I don't know why Field of the Dead's legal, but whatever. Let's just assume that Field of the Dead is one of the pillars and that the Luca token deck is kind of like an exciting new up-and-comer. Isn't one of the decks that we got to talk about still Goblins? I mean, we did talk about it last week, so maybe we don't need to go too deep into it, but I think it's really important to note before we get over to your beloved Mono Red.
Oh, no. Mono Red is not even close to the deck that I think is the best deck in the format to play, although it is a red deck.
Well, then, okay, so what? Before I give my piece about Goblins, what do you think is the best deck in the format then?
Rakdos Sacrifice. Hands down. So in the Hooglandia Open, you're talking about, I think Luca Moretti went 10-0 in that with a Rakdos Sacrifice deck.
Okay. Yeah.
So one of the really important recent additions to this strategy, which is it seems like a relatively minor upgrade from the standard version, but it's got Phyrexian Tower as one of its additions, as well as Dragon Skull Summit to make the mana a little bit better, right? So the reason I think this deck is so good is a kind of a twofold thing. One, it's quicker than the Field of the Dead decks, right? It can win the game before the Field of the Dead decks really kind of get their groove on. But the more important thing is if you're playing against like the Naya Luca kind of token decks, Mayhem Devil completely contains the Craterhoof Behemoth portion of their deck. So all you have to do, unless they have a Fire Prophecy, is just sit with a Mayhem Devil in play and then any source of sacrifice, right? You can have a Priest of Forgotten Gods, you could just have a Witch's Oven, you can have a food token sitting around, and it's extraordinarily difficult for them to ever go off with their Transmogrifier Luca, and then you can just chip shot them with the Mayhem Devil and, get them in for 1 or 2 points at a time. It'll be very difficult for them to kind of gain ground against you. In addition, this deck makes pretty good use of Bolas' Citadel. The version that won the Hooglandia Open has 4 copies of Bolas' Citadel. And that card obviously does a number of things.
You're talking about Barrington's list?
The version I'm looking at was played by Luca Moretti.
Okay. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so Bolas' Citadel, while it itself is an expensive card at 3 BBB, most of the rest of the stuff in this deck is relatively inexpensive, so you can kind of churn through it, and of course, accumulating a lot of material on the battlefield in a deck that has a sub-theme of sacrifice, horrible things can happen for your opponent if they let you get to that point.
So definitely, and the Mayhem Devil is actually a very important part of the equation for the god. Like that's a huge part of the reason why the Rakdos deck has such a good matchup against the de facto best deck, quote unquote, best deck in the format, Goblins. I do think that the Goblin deck is very warping and certainly a defining influence in the format because of just how incredibly powerful Muxus is. But the Goblin deck gets eaten alive by Mayhem Devil. If you don't have a Gem Palm Incinerator to deal with it, it's like, first of all, it can pick off your stuff. How are you going to keep a Snoop on the table? And if your whole plan, like if you're hoping to get Skirk Prospector and untap so that you can drop Mucus. It's like, Skirk Prospector is not at its best against Mayhem Devil.
No. Mayhem Devil is sweet in this Rakdos sacrifice, Rakdos Aristocrats deck in Historic. So which Goblin deck do you think is worth talking about first, the red or the Rakdos?
Before switching off on the Historic, before switching off the Rakdos deck, it is worth noting that there's some variation we've seen, right? Where, for instance, did you see, does Grim Initiate do anything for you? That's kind of a surprising addition. How are you're not into like a Lurrus of the Dream Den variation instead of a Bolas of Citadel build, are you?
So Grim Initiate doesn't do anything for me, to answer your question. I don't find it to be that exciting. I could be convinced on a Lurrus of the Dream Den. I mean, that guy is a very powerful creature. I think Bolas of Citadel is just so explosive in this archetype. That's the thing. Like, the cards are so cheap, they
That's
just
true.
flow, right? And so
That's a very good point.
the other thing is a lot of the cards, like, weirdly, even though Bolas of Citadel costs what it costs when you're working it, like, they play this weird kind of offense-defense where you're like, Cauldron Familiar comes into play and then gives you a life immediately, stuff like that.
Sure. What about hybridizing goblins with Rakdos and actually playing Rakdos sacrifice goblins?
So are we talking about, like, basically a goblin deck and then adding some engine stuff to it? Is that the thought
Right.
you got there?
I think somebody actually played this one recently, and shout out to MTGA Zone for being a premier source of tracking all the various goings-ons of what's currently getting played in Historic. But Spencer Paskett's top 8 list featured a Goblins deck that's basically just the package with Call of the Death Dweller that we talked about last week. But what I wonder is that now that we have access to Phyrexian Tower, because like right now you've only got 4 Blood Crypts and 4 Dragonskull Summits to support the splash. I kind of wonder, what if we actually put Phyrexian Tower in one of these?
I mean, Phyrexian Tower is just insane in a deck that has, like, a bunch of cheap, garbagey creatures anyway, right?
Exactly, and a deck that so badly wants to get up to playing, like, even though it has only 22 land, wants to be able to play Muxus Goblin Grandy. If you can play Muxus Goblin Grandy a turn ahead of schedule, I don't know, man. That seems like really exciting to me.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Also, it just call a spade a spade. This deck only has, 4 Blood Crypts and 4 Dragonskull Summits. It only, main deck, Spencer only played 2 copies of Call of the Death Dweller. But that card costs black, and it is extraordinarily powerful in combination with some of the cards in this deck, right? We talked about it before. Using Call of the Death Dweller to get a Goblin Chain Whirler is insane, right? And, there's plenty of things that would be very good, if not as good as that. And so just an additional source of B might be very welcome.
Yeah, and it's not like a deck has to be literally 100% red sources for the Chain Whirler. You've even got Skirk Prospector to help,
Yeah. I mean, this deck is interesting to me in that Spencer played 2 copies of Call of Death Dweller main, 1 copy in the sideboard, and that was the extent of the black, I think?
Yep.
So Spencer must really have been valuing that combination with Goblin Chain Whirler, which is...
Well, it just wins the mirror. It wins the mirror so hard.
Oh, sure. I think it wins a lot of matches pretty hard, actually. I mean, just the Chain Whirler by itself, right? Like, even without combination with Call of the Death Dweller, has got to be one of the best cards in the format against that Boros/Naya deck, right? Like, almost all their stuff is 1/1s.
Yep. So how committed to Rakdos are you for the sacrifice deck? Because, did you see Haldren's? There is Jund, of course, with, like, Crumbs, but there's also Mono Black. So Halden was playing a Mono Black list featuring the Witch's Oven, Cauldron Familiar, Phyrexian Tower, all that, right? But what's going on here to help, fill out the deck when you've got so much, so there's 3 copies of Lurrus in the main deck. It's not a Lurrus, it's obviously not a Lurrus companion deck. It's just playing Lurrus just to get your stuff back. And then it's a Liliana Standard Bearer deck with Vito, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life, and for 3 BB, creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn.
So Vito, Thorn of the Dusk Rose is way more dangerous than I think a lot of people probably appreciate if they haven't played with or against it yet. There's obvious things, right? So if you have a creature like Lurrus, which is a 3-power creature that naturally has lifelink, if you have Vito in play, it basically hits like a ball lightning, right?
Right.
So, you take 3, they gain 3, and you take an extra 3, right? But Vito has that additional ability to give creatures you control lifelink. I think that's extremely important when you consider that this version plays, just a ton of creatures that you might just be slamming into the red zone, and anybody who's unblocked is just gonna deal additional damage.
But where the real fun comes from is that your food from Witch's Oven, each piece of food you eat is 3 more damage. So your food are all now, your food have turned into, lightning helixes to the face. Blood Artist, that's a lot of life gain.
Oh, Blood Artist is filthy in this deck.
Exactly. But when you have Vito with Blood Artist, instead of each of your creatures being able to drain your opponent for 1, they do 2 to your opponent and you gain 1. And the Cauldron Familiar, it makes your opponent lose 2 and you gain 1 for each process, for each loop. And if you have Cauldron Familiar, each time you sack the Cauldron Familiar to the Witch's Oven, all the Blood Artists still trigger. And if you have Vito, you're getting double triggers and all that. But there's more. If you're playing with, in this case, there's 2 spicy 1-ofs. The Erebos' Intervention can be used as a graveyard hate card, but it's also target creature gets -X and on a turn, you gain X life. You could sink extra mana from Phyrexian Tower or Priest of the Forgotten Gods, whatever. And now Erebos' Intervention is basically a double fireball of sorts. It's like a profane command.
That's pretty cool.
And then the other one is Exquisite Blood. Exquisite Blood is an enchantment for 4 and a black. Whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. So if you have Vito and Exquisite Blood, if your opponent takes any damage or you gain any life, it loops and you kill them.
Oh.
Yeah.
All in one.
Yep.
Is that...
yeah.
Oh, assuming you've got the other path. I mean,
you
is
have
that
to have
really
Vito.
Worth 1 slot and 5 mana?
Are you saying you'd want more or less?
No. I mean, I look at this deck and I'm like, this deck that Tahaldan played has a lot of insane stuff going on. I could honestly get behind a lot of this, but I'm looking at like Exquisite Blood and like probably find 3 other cards to go with Exquisite Blood, and those things are going to be transformed into Mayhem Devils for me.
I don't know. I think you might want to try the Exquisite Blood before selling that one short. I think the combo can help you get over the hump a little bit, because I think that obviously it has very, very diminishing returns, which is part of the reason why you're seeing only 1 here. But you can actually race some people with the help of Exquisite Blood, even if you don't draw Vito. And then in games that get kind of locked up, having the ability to do infinite, that's kind of interesting.
So
the one last life gain card that I wanted to call out is kind of nice here, which is Serrated Scorpion.
Oh, that card's awesome.
It is. Vito plus awesome. Scorpion is a deceptively great amount of damage.
So a couple things here. One, I can't believe there's only 1 copy of Tymaret Chosen from Death in the sideboard. There's so many graveyard decks in this format. I think you'd want more Tymarets. And is there ever been a deck where Tymaret shined harder than here? Tymaret Vito is sweet, right? Just use Tymaret's ability.
Dude, I would play 4 Vitos though.
I think I would play 4 vetoes also. I just think Timler, it's awesome. I think, this is going to sound a little heretical, Lurrus is only pretty good in this deck as a main.
I agree. That's actually the exact one I was thinking of when you were talking about getting Mayhem Devils into this list.
Like, he's not bad. He's pretty good.
Mayhem Devil's really good in the format right now, though.
Yeah, the reason that I like Mayhem Devil so much is it is utterly dominating against tokens. And, they just... this could be the better version of Sacrifice, but it would still be a Rakdos Sacrifice deck. I am shocked that there are 3 Blood Artists. Blood Artist also seems awesome in this deck. Every plan A thing that this deck does, even without the Veto Exquisite Blood kind of unique aspect of Halden's deck, Blood Artist works so well with all of those things, right? It works with just sending your guy into the red zone. It works with clearly it works with kind of the Witch's Oven aspect of the deck.
Mm-hmm. I did want to point out a card that is worthy of a little bit closer of inspection that might get an eyebrow raise out of you. So Gempalm Polluter. Gempalm Polluter is one of the cards that's been legal for a little bit from being added from one of the 3 anthologies. It's old school from back in the day, Onslaught, 5 in a black, or Onslaught block. It's 5 in a black for a 4/3 zombie with cycling of BB. When you cycle Gempalm Polluter, you may have target player lose life equal to the number of zombies on the battlefield. So you think, hey, this is a mono black deck. Maybe that's a nice angle to add, right? How many zombies are in this deck? Let's go take a look.
Foulmire Knight, Standard Bearer.
There's 3 Foulmire Knights, 3 Standard Bearers. And that's it. There's just 6 zombies. So why, might you ask? Why would you sideboard in a Gempalm Polluter?
Because the other guy might make 100 zombies with his land.
Field of the Dead. This is a piece of Field of the Dead anti-Field of the Dead tech. You are exactly right.
It's pretty sweet. I think Revenge of the Ravens also does a lot of good work in field matchups and also this is a crusher against Boros, right? If they don't get the actual combo, Revenge of the Ravens.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess they just have so many ways to get the combo. Yeah, they're going to do 100. So, but yeah, it can be helpful. It's still good, particularly since you want to kind of keep them off their plan A anyway. That's already part of your plan, right?
Yeah. Is Timurit good against Kethis combo?
It is, but it's a little slow.
This deck is super exposed to Kethis combo, though. Right
there. I think so. It's got that one Erebos' Intervention. But yeah, I think it's a little slow. I think you're just going to get outraced.
I think it's very worthy of a call out. I could also get behind this deck. I think its plan A seems way more cohesive than the natural Rakdos version. I think I'd earmark the Lurrus. If you were going to play that new 1/1 that makes a 5/5 if you play from the graveyard, I think I could get behind Lurrus in the main deck, but this deck doesn't have that. So, I mean, is Foulmire Knight that good in this deck? Creatures aren't that big, are they? I guess if you're playing Foulmire Knight out of the graveyard a bunch, it's sweet.
So there's a very different kind of, quote, mono black, end quote, deck. Did you see the Master Pie's second place list from the Hooglandia Open?
I did.
It's a mono black control deck, right? So to speak.
Main deck, Gifted Aetherborn. Love it.
I thought of you immediately. So you've got Murderous Rider, Gonti, Gifted Aetherborn, and Dread Presence. You're like, okay, and maybe Ugins to help round it out. Those are some cards. They're pretty good, and they kind of fit like a tone, a general vibe. Oh, and then there's 3 Golos. Oh, there's 3 Golos. Is there like a Field of the Dead pack? No, there's not a Field of the Dead package. There's 16 swamps. Oh, you're just playing Golos with 16 swamps. Oh, okay. You're not going to activate it? Oh, no. We're going to activate it. We're just going to activate it with either 4 Chromantic Lanterns, 1 Chromantic Orrery, or the fact that, at the end of the day, you got plenty of time to lock things up. And I don't know. Mastermind's Acquisition can kind of get it together for you too, right? Like you can just go Acquisition for your Orrery.
So,
But the big thing, the fun part here is that your 4 copies of Mastermind's Acquisition, they also have access to, out of your sideboard, 1 copy of Inspired Ultimatum and 1 copy of Ruinous Ultimatum. Plus, yes, Banefire, which, that's another Michael J. style of card. Although you're more of a Demon Fire guy.
Oh, no. I mean, I was a Demon Fire guy because Banefire hadn't been printed yet.
Yeah.
Banefire is the better Demon Fire most of the time, I think.
The ability to actually kind of like take over with the newly added Phyrexian Arena, that's kind of exciting, right?
Yeah, I think this deck is really it's funny because it has so many different ways it can go when you're actually playing it. But it's a pretty cohesive deck strategically, right? This deck's got like 3 Cabal Stronghold, 2 Dread Presence. Like, this is very much like, our Golos deck is about having a bunch of swamps in play, right? And everything kind of flows from there. I think, is Ritual Suit is that better than Languish? Languish is available, isn't it?
Languish is available. I think that the reason that Ritual Soot might be in here, so Ritual Soot works better with Gonti and Dread Presence. Well, you get to keep your Dread Presence instead of just languishing it off the board.
That makes sense.
Plus, sometimes you actually kill stuff that's bigger than 4/4. The size of the X spells, that Banefire, I think, it's not to be underestimated. When your deck has 3 Cabal Strongholds and a Chromatic Orrery and a lot of ways to go find it, it's your ability to actually do some I guess I'm going to Banefire your 14 or whatever, is actually pretty real, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you got Lanterns and Golos to help ramp even more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I look at a deck like this, I'm often very excited, right? I have a soft spot for mono black control decks, especially mono black control decks with tutors in them. But I guess it can be pretty flexible, right? There's 2 Gifted Aetherborns in the main. You got to bring more Gifted Aetherborns in. So I think a lot of people are just attacking you in this format. Right? What do you think about that one, Patrick?
Yeah, I think they are. I think a lot of people are attacking you. The thing is, though, that I think a lot of people who are attacking have the possibility of potentially going over the top of Gifted Aetherborn. So it remains to be seen how much, obviously, the Aetherborn gives you a little defense, but it's not like it stops them from just crater hoofing you on whatever turn.
No,
it's not like it stops them from beating you with Muxus or Gempalm Incinerator,
I think that what you want is the combo of Gifted Aetherborn to slow them down a little bit. Then they have to deploy multiple things before they do their big thing. And then you can use Cry of the Carnarium, which is only -2/-2. Your Aetherborn theoretically lives through that in order to just kind of manage the board. Because most of those decks that are attacking you and potentially can go over top of the Aetherborn, they need a little setup before they do that, right? Yep. But yes, I think you are absolutely correct. 1-for-1 removal stuff like Murderous Rider is not going to get you very far against people who are hoofing. Even if you were able to hit the Craterhoof Behemoth with a 1-for-1 removal spell at instant speed, you're probably still taking a substantial amount of damage that turn.
So we talked about Peer into the Abyss last week, but this is there's a different style of Peer into the Abyss that's been made possible that I think is because of Field of the Dead being added back into the format that's worthy of a closer look. So Nymax is packing a list that's it looks on the surface like it's a Sultai. It looks like it's like one of those blue-green ramp decks where you're like, okay, it's got 4 Explorer and 4 Growth Spiral and 29 land for its Field of the Dead action, right? And it's got 4 Arboreal Grazer and a couple Uros. It's even got 4 Migration Path. So this is a deck with a crazy amount of ramp, right? That's literally 47 cards dedicated to mana and putting mana into play faster, right? So what's the rest of the deck? Is there removal? No, there's no removal. Is there any card draw? No, not besides, Uro or whatever. So what's even in the deck? Oh, it's just a combo deck with Peer into the Abyss. And then it's got either you can get down Psychic Tutelage is the better one, or Psychic Corrosion. So Psychic Corrosion is, so Teferi's Tutelage is the Tuna Blue enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. And whenever you draw a card, target opponent mills 2 cards. So it's you get to put it down and you get to mill them immediately for 2 cards because you drew a card.
Yeah,
right?
so if you draw 50, they mill 100, right? That's basically the
exactly
goes.
So if you ever just peer into the abyss yourself, you deck your opponent, assuming that their deck is like less than 80 cards or whatever.
It's funny. Like this deck is probably pretty standardable outside Field of the Dead, right?
And then Psychic Corrosion, which was an M19, is it's basically the same thing, but you don't get the loot. You don't get to draw 2, or you don't get to mill them for 2 on the way in. And the mill them for 2 on the way in is it's not trivial. It really does matter. Part of the reason it matters, and part of the reason why Growth Spiral and Explore are such an incredible package here, but also Uro drawing a card and Migration Path having cycling is really important, is because this deck uses 4 copies of Scheming Symmetry, which is the black sorcery. You and your opponent each search your deck for whatever card you want, and you put it on top. But the thing is that if you Scheming Symmetry and then you drop Psychic Tutelage, you just mill the card that your opponent was going to get that was so good.
Oh, that is awesome.
And even if you have Psychic Corrosion, you can still pull it off. You just need to add one more piece to the combo with either Growth Spiral or Explorer or cycle your Migration Path or, Uro, something. You can use you can even cycle your Lonely Sandbar. There's a ton of ways to do it. So Scheming Symmetry is actually awesome in this deck. You just need to have either a Teferi's Tutelage or a Psychic Corrosion.
I think this deck is super inventive, and I actually think it's more exciting for Standard. I think obviously Field of the Dead is a big loss, but I think you could do all the rest of it.
Kind of interesting, huh?
Super interesting.
Teferi's Tutelage is like such a good way to be doing it. And if you've got, how many ways do you have to force your opponent to shuffle? Because if you Field of Ruin your opponent, you shuffle their deck.
Yeah, you do.
They don't get to, even if they don't go find a land, you're shuffling their deck. That's pretty good with Scheming Symmetry,
That's outstanding. That card is available in Standard right now, isn't it?
They just reprinted it. I'm not sure how many sets they reprinted it in.
I mean, it's a really good combo with Scheming Symmetry, though.
Yeah. I think they just put it in a Standard legal set, but I don't know. Hopefully, people can just yell at us a whole bunch when it turns out that it's not.
No, I'm pretty sure it's Standard legal. You know what is real interesting about this? If you were to play it in, I guess you could play it in Historic, obviously, but if you were to play it in Standard also, is there are certain decks that have a relatively narrow number of super key cards that they need to hit. And when you play a card like Teferi's Tutelage, it just randomly mills them, even if you're not completely set up. I mean, Temur only has so many expansion explosions, and they kind of need to string them into each other. It's kind of interesting.
I'm not getting sucked into a debate about the deck thinning.
People always say that, and then they get mad when their one key card gets milled. Just saying, it's been going on since 1993.
True. A lot of people don't realize Millstone wasn't since the beginning, but it was since 93. Right around the turn of the year, actually, with Antiquities, or right at the beginning of 94, the people getting milled out. I guess in 93, you just get milled out from the way of I brain geyser you for 40, which is enough. But so on the Goblin front, people have been continuing to develop various forms of goblins. Some of them will be more committed to the Muxus plan. Some of them will be a little more aggressive. There's more good goblins than you can play. plus there's that, there's the call stuff if you want to play black, but there's also, like, for instance, are you going to play Goblin Matron? A lot of people don't even play Goblin Matron because at a certain point your deck is, I would play Goblin Matron, but at a certain point you can only do so much stuff, right? Like Muxus, Ringleader, Matron, they're all Snoop, they're all finding you more and more and more stuff. And then there's
we should talk about some of these cards for a second, right? So we talked about Muxus a week or two ago. Muxus Goblin Grandy. It's weird to me that people are only playing 2 copies. Because there's
so many ways to go find it, I think is the theory.
Yeah,
I would play more. I personally like 3 copies plus 4 Matron and 4 Ringleader.
Yeah, but this is their thing, right? Like, I think the difference in the games where you land a Muxus, which you're often landing with the help of Skirk Prospector and different kinds of, sacrificing guys or mana cheat abilities, is probably quite different than the games that you have to play fair, right?
Well, no, you don't play them fair, though. You still have goblins. You still have Snoop Doggy Dog and the Ringleader. And that's to say nothing of the fact that, okay, maybe Muxus is plan A, but it's not like Snoop and Ringleader aren't a hell of a plan B. And it's not like Krenko Mob Boss backed up by both Goblin Warchief and Goblin Chieftain. Like, that's an incredible plan C. And even if all that's not enough, if you just got to play fair, your cards are like Goblin Chain Whirlers and Gem Palm Incinerators.
Like really high quality guys.
Yeah, and you've got like Castle Embereth and stuff. Like, your deck is just really, really good.
Yeah, I'm looking at this deck. It's weird to me. You play 3 Goblin Warchief and 3 Goblin Chieftain, right? Isn't Warchief just better than Chieftain?
I think so. I do. A lot of people play 4 Warchief. I think the standard is you play 4 Warchief and 2 Chieftain. I think that the reason the people who play like a ton of Chieftains are usually the people who don't play Goblin Matron. If you move away from Goblin Matron and really focus on the backup plan as being your main plan, then you end up going in a direction where the Goblin Chieftain starts to get more appealing.
Yeah, I just think that the ability of the Warchief to cheat Muxus or those guys out faster is really compelling.
Yeah, but the thing is, the Goblin Chieftain is a much better combo with Krenko.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of them is really good at going wide. The other one is good at kind of
going tall.
And
that's why you play the split. That's why you play the mix, So you have the option if you draw both,
Yeah, I really also like the Chieftain in combination with cards like Goblin Instigator, where you have like the Chieftain. I'm sorry, the Warchief. I apologize. And then you could just play like 3 Goblin Instigators, something, because they cost like 1 in a red. So you get a little bit of freebie there, and even though he's the guy who's supposed to be helping you go tall, he's actually very good at helping you go wide if there's colorless casting costs involved.
Yeah, the other thing I think is that it's really important to have ways to be able to play your Muxus and stuff like that without counting on Skirk Prospector. I think people are starting to realize that you got to kill Skirk Prospector. And if Skirk Prospector doesn't live, it's not that easy to cast Muxus, until we add the Phyrexian Towers a little bit later. But the Warchief actually making Muxus come online a little bit earlier is like, I think that's a very, very real part of the power.
Yeah, I would be totally in for that. Conspicuous Snoop is a new card from M21. You kind of alluded to it multiple times. This card is fantastic, right? It's RR for
absolutely
2/2 Goblin Rogue. It has a ton of abilities, and every one of its abilities are just like, wow, on a red utility beatdown creature. So it's play with the top card of your library revealed. You may cast goblin spells from the top of your library. What if you only had goblins? Interestingly, you could just play all your spells then for free. Not for free mana, but, as extra cards. And then it has this other ability, as if that second ability weren't already so strong. As long as the top card of your library is a goblin card, Conspicuous Snoop has all activated abilities of that card.
Yeah, and the most notable one, of course, I mean, so it is nice to have Skirk Prospector, but it doesn't really matter that much because you can just usually play the Skirk Prospector off the top, and then who cares, right? But the one that's really exciting is Krenko Mob Boss, because sometimes you just don't have enough mana to cast Krenko off the top. So if you can actually just have Krenko's activated ability on your Snoop without having to pay for it, that could be extremely explosive randomly.
Yeah, the other thing is that your Snoop just doesn't have summoning sickness, right? So if you go like turn 2 Snoop, reveal a Krenko, right, you can just tap your Snoop to make tokens, untap, and tap it again before you draw the Krenko.
Oh, yeah, for the Krenko. For the Prospector, you just go.
Yeah.
But for Krenko, you already have haste because your Snoop's just been in play.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, that actually makes me want to play more Krenkos. But
oh, yeah, I think Krenko's awesome. No, I don't think it's crazy. I think Krenko's awesome. The other thing is that Snoop is really, like, it sounds funny, but resetting the top of your deck, it does matter. You see, when you've got Goblin Matron and Goblin Ringleader, particularly if you're playing a lot of War Chiefs so that your Goblins are cheaper, you get stuck sometimes where the top card of your deck is a land, but you get to have a fresh look at the top when you use the Ringleader or the Matron to shuffle, or to reset the top card, so that then if your top card is like another Goblin, you just keep going. I know it might sound like TRGR, but
no.
richer, but it matters. All that.
It's like when you get stuck on an experimental frenzy, right?
It is. Yep.
The Snoop is basically a 2 in this deck, which is all goblins, right? So that's the only kind of spell you have. It's like literally a 2-mana experimental frenzy that attacks and blocks. So the things that are great with experimental frenzy, which is the ability to play a bunch of extra cards, are great with the Snoop, but you can also get stuck. That's the thing. Sometimes you just get stuck with land on top of your frenzy and you weren't making forward progress. Any of that stuff. I mean, cycling, if that's what you're up to, is valuable to reset that top of the library. And, that card is very, very strong in this archetype, clearly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's just a very, 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 very strong card anyway. Just on the merits. I mean, it's a 2/2 for 2. Like, how many extra cards do you need before your 2/2 for 2 is paid for itself? 1.
I mean, 1
right?
is already, it's great.
Right, exactly. So,
and the other thing is, which one is it? Because the thing about the Snoop is, like, your mileage can vary, but you might get a real good card out of that. Like, what if you got like a Krenko tap and a Krenko? Like, that's pretty sweet.
So, while I personally am more on the Goblin side as far as mono red decks go, I think it is cute that Hell Rider is a new card made possible because of Jumpstart that combines and potentially reinvigorates the Cavalcade of Calamity Cavalcade of Calamity plus Hell Rider is kind of like an exciting interaction, right? And I'm sorry, not just interaction, but all the cards that incent Cavalcade work with Hell Rider, and also they work with Torbrand, and the Hell Rider and Torbrand together just goes DI.
Yeah. I mean, that's a, enormously cascading amount of damage that's highly synergistic with each other. But I think I'm on the same team as you. All those cards, I guess they have good overlaps. They have good incentives, to be played in the same deck. But I feel like the Goblin deck, while it's not, it's not the same, right, as a Cavalcade or a Hell Rider in terms of what kind of damage output it's putting out, every one of its cards is kind of more contributing to the whole than I think in the non-Goblin aggro deck.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. Hell Rider seems like a card you might want to play, and it seems pretty cute, but it doesn't seem like a killer, right? Like, Snoop and Muxus are killers. Yeah, all these lords. The Goblin deck's full of lords also. All killers. Mm-hmm. All murderers. I mean, how bad is just a Cavalcade with nobody to support it?
It's not good. There's a different combo deck. We mentioned Exquisite Blood earlier. There's a different combo deck that's kind of 4 different combo decks at the same time. I think the top finisher, there was an Obzon Famished Paladin combo by MTG Jeff. So there's a lot to unpack about this list. So to start with, there's 3 copies of Exquisite Blood and 4 copies of Veto. Okay, I get it. This is a person who's actually trying to build a combo deck instead of like a sacrifice deck. They've got 3 Exquisite Blood, 4 Veto, and if you ever get those 2 together, any life gain or damage dealt, you win, right? Sounds good. There's also Revival Revenge. So Revival Revenge, the revival side is Orzhov, return target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, such as Veto, among others. And then the Revenge side is 4 white, black sorcery, double your life total, target opponent loses half their life total. So if you Revenge when you have Veto, you double your life total, have your opponent's life total, then you do damage to them. Like then they lose life equal to the amount that you gained. So as long as your life is like equal to theirs or more, you win, right?
That is a pretty cool combo. I mean, among this deck's many combos.
And if you Revenge while you have Exquisite Blood, then you win as long as your life is equal to or above your opponent's. And even if it's not, you end up like draining them for 17 or whatever, right?
That's
so it's kind of cool that out of Exquisite Blood, Veto, and Revival Revenge, any 2 out of the 3 kills your opponent in most cases. Now, that's not all the combos, though. There's also Famished Paladin, which is 1 and a white. It doesn't untap during your untap step, and whenever you gain life, untap it. Well, like whenever you gain life, untap it. That looks like it's an engine, right? So if you have Presence of Gond, that's a new aura made possible from Jumpstart. 2 and a green. Enchanted creature has tapped to put a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token onto the battlefield, right? So if you put Presence of Gond on the Famished Paladin, you have infinite token. Like you just need to have a way to gain life, such as 4 Soul Wardens, right? Like if you have Soul Warden, then every time you tap the Paladin, you get a token, which gains you a life, which untaps the Paladin, which means you can tap it to gain tokens. And if you happen to have a Veto in play or whatever, then you convert your infinite life and infinite tokens into infinite damage. There's also Heliod, Suncrowned. And if you have Heliod Suncrowned, then obviously all these different life gain procs are giving you counters on top of everything else, right? But you can also, just hit people for a ton. I don't know. The other one is Ajani's Welcome. Just gaining lots of life and then valuing people out between the Exquisite Blood or Veto or whatever else,
Yeah.
And then finally there's just weirdly 4 Sorcerer's Wands. What do you think about Sorcerer's Wand, man?
What does that one do?
So Sorcerer's Wand is 1 colorless for an equipment, and 3 to equip. The equipped creature is tapped to do 1 damage to a player or planeswalker, and if you put it on a wizard, which you don't, you would do 2. So the thing you do is that you put the Sorcerer's Wand on the Famished Paladin, right? And then if you have Heliod, you're giving lifelink to the Paladin, and then every time the Paladin does what damage, because of the Sorcerer's Wand, it untaps. So you keep going.
Oh, that's really cool.
Or you can put Sorcerer's Wand on Alseid of Life's Bounty. Now, you don't get to untap it the same way, but, you end up getting a bunch of counters and doing a bunch of damage pretty quickly. And the other thing is that you can use Splendor Mare to give lifelink also. It's not like you just need Heliod. Splendor Mare giving something lifelink, which can be a sick surprise when you've got a Veto on the table or whatever. And then finally, there's Forerunner of the Legion as a possible 5th copy. What do you think of Forerunner of the Legion? Where you go, tutor up a vampire and put it on top of your deck. And then it also has this ability of whenever a vampire enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. But mainly what this card is a 3-mana 2/2 that puts Veto on top of your deck. The other thing, though, is they can go get the Famished Paladin. And what's interesting is that all of these different combos that we just talked about, they have a vampire somewhere in the mix. Both of them can have a vampire. You know, like there are the veto combos and the famished paladin combos. Do you think you can really pull off so many pieces of both combos?
I mean, it sounds like you want even more Forerunner of the Legions.
I just wonder, like, I think it's cute how much they spiderweb together, but I kind of feel like the Sorcerer's Wand, Presence of the Gond, Famished Paladin package, that's got like a lot of vulnerabilities at different places. Like, you need an enchantment that you put on a creature, and you have an artifact that you equip to the creature, and then you activate it, and there's so many points where you can get broken up, and it needs 3 cards.
Yeah,
I think I would just focus on the 2-card combos.
There are decks that are bad against creature-based combos, but the problem is other parts of the deck are already creature-based combos, right? Like, you don't need to have like 14 different combos. Like 2 different combos is already a lot, right?
Definitely.
You know, and then maybe be able to have a little bit more of a plan A. I don't know. Or just play more fast tutors, right? That's a thing you could do. Instead of playing like overlapping redundancies into more combos, you could just make the other combos you have either faster or more consistent.
Yep. And that's what I think I would want to do, is try to make it faster and more consistent. The part I wonder is if there's any way to take the Veto, Exquisite Blood, Revival, Revenge package and mix it with some kind of a Bolas' Citadel sacrifice deck.
That's actually what I was thinking.
With a lot of Phyrexian Towers, because Phyrexian Tower is great with all these combos anyway. But those sacrifice decks have so much random life gain from, the Scorpion and the Cauldron Familiar or whatever else,
Revival Revenge is so good in decks that have Bolas' Citadel. That's the thing, right?
Dude, you can also Revival Revenge back your Mayhem Devil? Eh?
You don't have to tell me twice.
Because you don't have to play white. Like, if you just get rid of the white combos
But you could. How
you
many
could play white if
you
you want. No, but you don't need any. You can splash white for Revenge. I don't mean cutting the Revenge part. Keep that.
Yeah, but say, the Mayhem Devil deck is already going to play like 4 Fabled Passage, right? Is it really that expensive?
No, just play 1 Plains.
Yeah. And it could be like a 25th land or something if you really needed to.
Yeah, but I don't think you do. You could. I just think Phyrexian Tower is basically 2 land.
Phyrexian Tower is so
Dude, I don't think people realize how busted Phyrexian Tower is.
I mean, I think that if they pay any attention to Historic over the course of the next couple of tournaments, they're going to quickly understand. I think Phyrexian Tower is extraordinarily powerful, not just as a mana acceleration card, but, it's so synergistic with all these engines people are playing, right? Like, you want to get your guys into the graveyard. You want to create enters the graveyard triggers. Sacrifice triggers.
And remember, you can still do things like, for instance, if you play a Cruxa, with the trigger on the stack, you can sacrifice it to Phyrexian Tower.
Oh, that's filthy.
That's pretty good, right?
Filthy.
That's so attractive. There's one last combo deck, and dude, there's like 15 more decks we could talk about, but there's one more that I think we absolutely have to cover today, just as an opening salvo, because I think that when this archetype gets perfected, there are a lot of similarities to Splinter Twin. So, Dual Caster. The Dual Caster Mage is a commander card that is finally making its debut in lower powered format in the form of being in Jumpstart. So because of Jumpstart, it's still not standard legal, but because of Jumpstart, it will now be legal in Historic. And Dual Caster Mage is 1 red for a 2/2 flash. When it enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. Okay, sounds reasonable enough. That's pretty good, right? A human wizard. That's already pretty.
It's like a little fork.
Types. Good types. And remember, Riptide Laboratory is legal. Nobody plays it yet, but they will. I think Riptide Laboratory just seems amazing. So if you've got Riptide Laboratory in your human wizard deck, great. But there's also stuff like Wizard's Retort. But anyway, let's save the human wizard synergies and focus on the text. It's a 2/2 flash that forks. That's pretty good for 3 mana, right? But it's not just that you can fork. It's also that you can fork, quasi-duplicate, or replicate. So quasi-duplicate is the 1 blue, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, and then it also has Jumpstart. one of the things that's so awesome about Quasi-Duplicate is that you can just play out Quasi-Duplicate for value whenever, and then it just sits in your graveyard being a combo piece they can't interact with very easily. You see, what happens is you go if you Quasi-Duplicate whatever, and then you respond by Dualcaster Maging, making a copy of Quasi-Duplicate, which makes a copy of Dualcaster Mage, which makes a copy of the Quasi-Duplicate that's still on the stack. And then you just repeat this as much as you want. And then you just have as many 2/2s as you could want. Right? Like that's pretty intense, right?
So let me see how it affects it. If you have a Dualcaster Mage in play, you can't just Quasi-Duplicate the Dualcaster Mage, can you?
You can if you have enough mana to jumpstart the Quasi-Duplicate. Because you have to Quasi-Duplicate basically you need to have no, you can't because it's still not an instant. But no, you have to actually Dualcaster Mage a Quasi-Duplicate is on the stack.
But then if you do, rock and roll. And
then Replicate is the backup plan. You can for 2 mana, you can stifle stuff, right? Like counter target activated or triggered ability for Simic. But the Replicate part is 1 green blue, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, which is basically just a Quasi-Duplicate without the jumpstart. So obviously Quasi-Duplicate's better, but it's nice to have a 5th and 6th copy. So what do you think, man?
I mean, obviously, I can respect a Splinter Twin, but it's not exciting to me in the same way that some of the other stuff that we talked about was exciting to me. I think maybe if I saw some performance, then maybe I'd change my mind. But
see, I think it's just missing a piece. Like, I think that you got to figure out a twist. Because, like, if this deck could go off at instant speed, the other problem is that it's not really well set up for permission yet, and that was one of the key elements of Splinter Twin is how compact.
Like, is this deck bad against some of the same things that the Craterhoof deck is bad against? So, like, if they kill your Dualcaster Mage in response that's getting targeted by one of the Quasi-Duplicates with, Mayhem Devil or just a regular removal spell or something, like, it's kind of vulnerable to that, right?
Extremely vulnerable.
So I feel like it's slower than the Craterhoof deck, has a worse plan A than the Craterhoof deck, and is still vulnerable to Mayhem Devil. So that's kind of the reason why I don't find it to be exciting. Obviously, its ceiling is the highest, right? Infinite damage is higher than, just like 100 damage or something, but you only need to do 100 damage. Like that's the reason why it's not as exciting to me. I mean, I like Infinite. Don't get me wrong. Just saying, you're committing 6 mana like all the time, right? Because you need the Dualcaster Mage and the spell kind of be running them out there at the same time. So it's a lot of your lands being tapped, which obviously, like you said, you're in a way worse position in terms of covering yourself with permission.
If only there was, like, if you just could play Quasi-Duplicate as an instant, I mean, it still takes enough mana that I think you're not quite there yet, but it'd be way better, not only because you could surprise hit your opponent like on their end step, but also because if you could play it as an instant, then you could actually have the Dualcaster already on the table and have the Quasi-Duplicate be the part that comes later for a little added versatility. It still doesn't get around the prime directive, though, because I think you're right. At the end of the day, this does sound like a worse plan A and a worse plan B than one of those.
Well, it's a worse plan A and a similar plan B, right?
Yeah, I guess it's a plan B that hits from a slightly different angle, so it might be a better positioned plan B, possibly. But, yeah, I think you're right. I don't think it's there yet. But I think it's one to watch, because I think that if somebody comes along with the right innovation, that's a very powerful interaction.
Yeah, agreed. And I do think that the ability to jumpstart with the piece just kind of sitting around is pretty awesome.
I keep thinking that the key to Dualcaster Mage is one of those decks that plays one of those cards that makes you copy enters the battlefield abilities, so that you end up in some situation where you were going to play that card anyway, and you can play the Dualcaster Mage for value and have it be a fine card, but then you just backdoor these weird 3-card combos that you're not all in on, but you can set up a loop because of that. But
I'd need to have a really good reason to do any of them, because almost all the other decks that you described, they do those things already, and they don't have some of the holes. But maybe, I guess Dualcaster Mage just has, like, its regular text is actually pretty efficient, right? So.
If you got to actually play the cards for it, though.
You do. Yeah, but if you do, then, it could potentially be getting you value, card advantage, or mana efficiency, or all of those things. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, awesome, dude. So what's your deck? Is it mostly black, splash red, Mayhem Devil, lots of Phyrexian Tower for Bolas and Citadel?
I think that I do like that mono black deck that you pointed out the best, and I think that I would experiment with Mayhem Devil, Phyrexian Tower, but the Naya deck seems awesome, and the regular Rakdos deck also seems awesome. All those decks seem like they could
Boros,
take it far.
man. There's no way. Dude, we got to save the Naya term for when people are willing to actually play with Forest.
All right. So we'll call it Boros tokens, Tinker. What I don't know. It's a Boros deck.
It's Boros tokens.
Yeah.
It's deck. It's so good. It got Winota banned already.
It's awesome.
Yep.
Super exciting. All right. Bye.
Awesome, dude. See you next week.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge, for jail or hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left